It's time for Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, inviting the atheist, agnostic, and skeptic to examine for themselves the evidence for the Christian faith. We are all limited by what we do not know and by the things we think we know but are not true. Dr. Joe Mott earned his PhD at LSU and was a distinguished math professor at Florida State University for 38 years, helping to write 3 math textbooks and authoring over 30 research articles in math. He is now the host of this radio program, Defending and Commending the Faith. Here is Joe Mott.
Hello to everyone. Thank you for joining the program. Followers of Christ are still being called into action for defending and commending the Christian faith. In the last few episodes, I've been discussing the 10 known ancient non-Christian sources who wrote about Jesus listed in the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norman Geisler and Frank Turek. I have already discussed 3 such writers. First, Thales, who is perhaps the earliest non-Christian writer to refer to Jesus. Second, Flavius Josephus, who became the greatest Jewish historian of his time. And third, a Syrian named Mara bar Serapion, a private citizen who wrote from prison to motivate his son Serapion to emulate wise teachers and a wise king, circa 73 AD. The wise king to which Mara bar Serapion refers is likely Jesus of Nazareth. Of the remaining 7 writers that Geisler and Turek mentioned, in the interest of time and space, I omit their comments on Jesus and instead generally refer to their names and the approximate times of their writings about Jesus, Christianity, or the facts that are consistent with the gospel accounts. The fourth of the Geisler and Turek list is Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor of Bithynia, who wrote to Emperor Trajan asking advice on how to deal with Christians whom he was prosecuting, circa 112 AD. The fifth is Cornelius Tacitus, circa 55 to 120 AD, who is considered to be one of the more accurate Roman historians of the ancient world. He lived through the reigns of over a half-dozen Roman emperors. He left 2 major works, the Annals and Histories. The work Annals covers the history of the period of the Roman Empire from Augustus's death in 14 AD to that of Nero in 68 AD. The Histories begins after Nero's death in 69 AD and proceeds to the death of Domitian in 96 AD. These works were written circa 115 to 116 AD. In Annals, Tacitus writes about suspicions that Emperor Nero was the one person guilty of causing Rome's great fire, and how he tried to deflect the blame to the Christians, from whom their name came from Christus, the Latin name for Christ. He recorded at least 1 reference to Christ and 2 to early Christianity, 1 in each of his major works. The sixth is Suetonius, chief secretary to the Emperor Hadrian, whose most famous work, Lives of the Caesars, circa 120 AD, recounts a brief history of the first 12 Caesars in the Roman Empire. In his chapter of the life of Claudius, 41 to 54 AD, he explained the emperor's reason for the decision to expel the Jews from Rome, an event recorded in Acts chapter 18, verse 2. Suetonius wrote, Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he expelled them from Rome. There is nearly unanimous consensus among scholars of all religious persuasions that Christus is a phonetic misspelling of the Latin Christus, which refers to Jesus Christ. The seventh in Geisler and Turek's list is Phlegon, a freed slave who wrote histories circa 140 AD. The eighth in the list is Lucian of Samosata, a 2nd century Greek satirist circa 166 AD. The ninth is Celsus, a 2nd century Greek philosopher who wrote a treatise, The True Doctrine, circa 175 AD, attacking Christianity. This was later refuted by Origen. The 10th of Geisler and Turek's list is the Jewish Talmud. The word Talmud is a Hebrew word meaning learning or instruction. The Talmud is a central text of mainstream Judaism and consists of rabbinical teachings from roughly AD 200 to 600 AD. There are several passages in the Talmud which are considered by some scholars to be references of Jesus of Nazareth. But in those passages, the name used is Yeshu, the Aramaic vocalization, not the spelling of the Hebrew word Yeshua. Most Talmudic stories which mention the name Yeshu are framed in different time periods from that of Jesus' lifetime, with the chronological discrepancies sometimes amounting to as much as a century from the time of Jesus' death. Wikipedia says that in the modern era, there has been a variance of views among Talmudic scholars of the possible references to Jesus. In 1978, Johann Maier wrote Jesus of Nazareth in the Talmudic Tradition, where he concludes that there is virtually no evidence of the historical Jesus in the Talmud. Since the reference to the Talmud mentioning the real Jesus is still in the debate, I intend to find another non-biblical ancient writer who refers to Jesus of Nazareth. Allow me to mention another reference taken from my YouTube article, Jesus Outside the Bible, with the subtitle Top 10 Historical References by Bryan Windle. Mr. Windle focuses on non-biblical authors from the 1st century. He includes several of the references that Geisler and Turek name, but also he lists early Christian writers in the first 2 centuries, including references to Clement, a 1st century leader at Rome, circa 70 to 96 AD, who wrote a letter to the church at Corinth. Clement was a disciple of the Apostle Paul. Windle also includes comments by the disciples of the Apostle John, Ignatius of Antioch, Polycarp of Ephesus, who became the leader of the church after the Apostle John was arrested and exiled to the Isle of Patmos. Windle refers to another pupil of the Apostle John, Papias, who became the bishop of Hierapolis. Windle mentions Quadratus, an early Christian apologist, and gives a basic outline of the elements of Jesus' life, like his birth, his teachings, the miracles he did, and his death and resurrection. And he says the same facts are affirmed by non-Christian writers. In the book, A Popular Survey of the New Testament, the author, Norman Geisler, records that the New Testament documents on Christ's life were possibly written as early as AD 40 to 60. And they were most certainly recorded during the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. Not only were the Gospels early enough to be reliable, but the basic information in them is corroborated by the generally accepted writings of Paul, written between 50 and 61 AD. Geisler goes on to say that the Apostle Paul confirmed at least 31 facts recorded in the Gospels. In the 1988 book, The Verdict of History, Gary Habermas investigated 17 sources that present valuable material with regard to the historical Jesus and early Christianity. Those sources that Habermas cites include, first, ancient historians like Tacitus, Josephus, and Thallus. Second, government officials like Pliny the Younger, the Emperor Trajan, and the Emperor Hadrian. Third, other Jewish sources like the Talmud and Toledoth Jesu, and anti-Christian document written in the 5th century that teaches that the disciples were the ones who removed the dead body from the tomb. Fourth, other Gentile sources like Lucian and Mara bar Serapion. Fifth, Gnostic sources like the Gospel of Truth, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Thomas, and the Treatise on the Resurrection. Sixth, Habermas also refers to other lost works, like Acts of Pontius Pilate. Origen relates that Phlegon mentioned that Jesus made certain predictions which had been fulfilled. This work of Phlegon is no longer in existence, so we have to depend on Origen for this information. Rather than giving Habermas's synopsis about what these sources say about Jesus and the early Christianity and the conclusions Habermas draws from them, allow me to give a summary from Lee Strobel's interview of the New Testament scholar Edwin Yamauchi at Miami University of Oxford, Ohio. Strobel asked, shouldn't we have expected to find more about Jesus in ancient writings outside the Bible? Yamauchi answered, when people begin religious movements, it's often not until many generations later that people record things about them. But the fact is that we have better historical documentation for Jesus than for any other founder of any other ancient religion. Yamauchi mentioned Zoroaster, Buddha, and Muhammad, saying that their biographies and writings appeared much later after their deaths. Yamauchi continues, the situation with Jesus is unique and quite impressive in terms of how much we can learn about him aside from the New Testament. Strobel asked Yamauchi what we could conclude about Jesus from ancient non-Christian sources. He answered, we would know that first, Jesus was a Jewish teacher. Second, many people believed that he performed healings and exorcisms. Third, some people believed he was the Messiah. Fourth, he was rejected by the Jewish leaders. Fifth, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate in the reign of Tiberius. Sixth, despite his shameful death, his followers, who believed he was still alive, spread beyond Palestine so that there were multitudes of them in Rome by AD 64. And seventh, all kinds of people from the cities and the countryside, men and women, slave and free, worshipped him as God. Piecing together all the declarations of the 9 ancient writers in the list from Geisler and Turek's book, we have the following 12 basic statements that corroborate what the Gospels say about Jesus' life. 1. Jesus lived during the time of Tiberius Caesar's reign. 2. He lived a virtuous life. 3. He was a wonder worker. 4. He had a brother named James. 5. He was acclaimed to be the Jewish Messiah. 6. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea. 7th, he was crucified on the eve of the Jewish Passover. 8th, darkness and an earthquake occurred when he died. 9th, his disciples believed he rose from the grave. 10th, his disciples were willing to die for their belief in the resurrection. 11th, Christianity spread rapidly as far as Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire. And 12th, his disciples denied the Roman gods and worshiped Jesus as God. Allow me to close this episode by reminding you, exercise daily, walk with God.
Thank you for listening to Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, a production of Wave 94 Radio in Tallahassee, Florida. If you have any questions or comments for Joe, please forward them to Doug Apple at Wave94 at this email address, dougapple@wave94.com. And be sure to join us every Monday evening at 6:45 p.m. on Wave 94 and subscribe through your favorite podcast app. Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott.